JikookVerse family, welcome back to JikookVerse, where every little moment can turn into a story worth talking about. Today, we are getting into one of those moments that sounds simple at first, but somehow becomes impossible to forget. Just Jimin and Jungkook in a taxi, that is it. No huge stage, no crowd, no cameras everywhere, no complicated schedule unfolding in front of thousands of people. Just two people, one taxi, a quiet ride through the city, and a series of little moments that somehow say much more than expected. And honestly, JikookVerse family, this is exactly the kind of story that makes you want to sit down, slow everything down, and pay attention to the details. Because sometimes the most memorable moments are not the loud ones. Sometimes they happen between destinations. Sometimes they happen when nobody is performing. And sometimes, apparently, a taxi ride is all it takes for Jimin and Jungkook to create a moment that stays on your mind long after the ride is over. The story begins late in the evening. Jimin and Jungkook had finished what had been a long and exhausting day. There was no big celebration waiting for them, no dramatic entrance, no special event. They simply needed to get somewhere else, so they stepped into a taxi, and right away, there was something different about the atmosphere. Jungkook settled into the seat while Jimin sat beside him, and for a few moments, neither of them seemed particularly interested in talking. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people are completely comfortable with each other. Not awkward, not forced, just quiet. The city was moving outside the windows, lights passing across the glass, cars filling the streets, and inside the taxi, everything felt much slower. Jimin looked out the window. Jungkook leaned back. And then, after a few moments, Jungkook apparently noticed something about Jimin. He asked if Jimin was tired. It sounds like a very ordinary question, but the way the moment unfolded made it feel much more personal. Jimin initially tried to brush it off. He said he was fine. Jungkook did not seem convinced. He looked at Jimin again and asked if he was really okay. And that tiny exchange immediately changed the mood, because Jungkook has always had a way of noticing small things. A change in expression, a quieter voice, a little less energy than usual. And Jimin, of course, seemed to realize that Jungkook had noticed. So instead of answering immediately, he smiled. That small smile said everything. Jungkook smiled too, and suddenly the taxi did not feel like a taxi anymore. It felt like their own little space, a temporary bubble moving through the city. Outside, everything was busy. Inside, there were only the two of them, talking quietly. Jimin eventually admitted that he was tired. Jungkook laughed softly and told him that he could sleep if he wanted. And this is where things became especially interesting, because Jimin did not immediately close his eyes. Instead, he turned toward Jungkook and asked why Jungkook was not tired. Jungkook laughed. He said he was tired too, and Jimin responded with that familiar teasing energy, basically telling Jungkook that if he was tired, he should stop pretending otherwise. The conversation was simple, nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, but there was an easy rhythm between them. One would tease, the other would answer. Then they would laugh. Then the taxi would become quiet again, and that rhythm continued for several minutes. JikookVerse family, this is the part where the story becomes unexpectedly sweet. Because after another stretch of silence, Jungkook noticed that Jimin had started leaning toward the window. Jungkook quietly adjusted the position of the seat so Jimin would be more comfortable. Jimin noticed. He looked at Jungkook and asked what he was doing. Jungkook simply said he was making it easier for Jimin to rest. Jimin smiled again, then he thanked him, 2 ordinary words. But the moment felt much bigger than that, because sometimes care is not about grand gestures. Sometimes it is about noticing that someone is uncomfortable and quietly fixing it without making a big deal about it. And that was exactly the energy inside the taxi. Quiet consideration, small gestures, and a lot of familiarity. As the taxi continued through the city, the conversation moved from their schedule to food. This might sound random, but somehow food always becomes a serious topic when Jimin and Jungkook are together. Jungkook suddenly asked what Jimin wanted to eat. Jimin answered that he was not sure. Jungkook suggested a few things. Jimin rejected almost every suggestion. Jungkook started laughing. He asked why Jimin had asked if he was going to reject everything. Jimin laughed too, and suddenly the tired atmosphere disappeared. They were joking again. Jungkook kept throwing out food suggestions. Jimin kept saying no. Then Jimin finally suggested something. Jungkook immediately agreed. And for some reason, that became one of those tiny moments that felt strangely satisfying. Because after several minutes of back and forth, they finally agreed on something. The driver continued toward their destination while the conversation became more relaxed. Jimin started talking about something that had happened earlier that day. Jungkook listened. He did not interrupt. He simply listened and occasionally responded. Then Jimin made a joke. Jungkook laughed so loudly that even Jimin started laughing at his reaction. The driver glanced at them through the mirror. Jimin noticed and immediately tried to calm Jungkook down. That only made Jungkook laugh harder, and now both of them were trying not to laugh, which, naturally, made everything worse. Because once two people start laughing at the same time over something that nobody else understands, it becomes almost impossible to stop. Jimin covered his face for a moment. Jungkook leaned back. Then they looked at each other and started laughing again. JikookVerse family, you know that feeling when something is not even that funny anymore, but the fact that you are laughing together makes it 10 times funnier. That was the energy. The taxi ride became less about getting somewhere and more about enjoying the few minutes they had together. Eventually, the conversation became quieter. Jungkook looked outside. Jimin rested his head back. The city lights reflected across the window, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Jimin quietly asked Jungkook if he remembered something from years earlier. Jungkook turned toward him. He said yes. Jimin asked if he really remembered. Jungkook smiled and said he did. That led to a conversation about old memories, places they had visited, things they had eaten, funny situations they had experienced, moments that other people might have forgotten, but apparently some memories stay. And hearing them talk about those memories made the taxi ride feel almost nostalgic. There was laughter, there was teasing, there were little pauses, and there was that comfortable silence that seemed to return every few minutes. At one point, Jimin asked Jungkook why he remembered such small details. Jungkook answered simply, because they mattered, and that sentence changed the mood. Jimin looked at him for a moment, then smiled. He did not say much. He just nodded, and Jungkook looked back out the window. It was a very small exchange. But sometimes a small sentence can stay with you longer than a long conversation. The taxi continued moving. Then the rain started, not heavy at first, just a few drops against the window. Jimin noticed it. He looked outside and said that the weather had changed. Jungkook looked too. The rain became heavier. The city lights blurred through the glass, and suddenly the atmosphere inside the taxi became even quieter. Jimin said that he liked nights like this. Jungkook asked why. Jimin said because everything felt slower. Jungkook agreed, and for a few moments they simply watched the rain. No jokes, no teasing, just silence. Then Jungkook reached for something beside him. It was a small bottle of water. He handed it to Jimin. Jimin took it, then looked at Jungkook. He asked if Jungkook wanted some. Jungkook said no. Jimin insisted. Jungkook finally took it. Another tiny moment. Another example of how their interaction seemed to be built around little exchanges. Give, take, tease, care, laugh, repeat. And perhaps that is why the taxi ride felt so memorable. Nothing huge was happening, yet everything felt meaningful. As they got closer to their destination, Jimin suddenly realized that the ride was almost over. He said it went by quickly. Jungkook agreed. Jimin joked that they should take the long way. Jungkook laughed and asked why. Jimin said because he was comfortable. Jungkook smiled. And for a second, neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook said they could stay a little longer. Jimin laughed and told him that was not how taxis worked. Jungkook laughed too, and there they were again, back to joking. But underneath the joke was something simple. They did not seem ready for the quiet little moment to end. Eventually, the taxi stopped at a red light. Jimin looked outside. Jungkook looked at him, and Jungkook suddenly asked if Jimin was feeling better. Jimin said yes. Then Jungkook asked if he was sure. Jimin nodded. And this time, he smiled without trying to hide it. He said he felt better because they had talked. Jungkook smiled, and that was probably the sweetest part of the entire ride, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Sometimes a long day becomes easier when you have someone beside you. Sometimes you do not need advice. You do not need a solution. You just need someone who notices that you are tired. Someone who asks. Someone who listens. Someone who makes you laugh. And someone who stays. The taxi finally reached their destination. Jungkook moved first, then Jimin, but before getting out, Jimin paused. He looked back at the seat, then at Jungkook, and said something that made Jungkook laugh. Apparently, Jimin was already complaining about how short the ride had been. Jungkook shook his head. He told Jimin that next time they should walk. Jimin laughed and said that would take too long. Jungkook said that was the point. Jimin looked at him, then laughed again, and they stepped out of the taxi. The rain was still falling lightly. They walked away together. And that should have been the end of the story. But somehow, the little taxi ride stayed with them, because there are moments that do not need a stage. They do not need thousands of people watching. They do not need a headline. They simply happen. Two people sitting next to each other after a long day, talking about food, remembering old stories, laughing at absolutely nothing, sharing quiet moments, checking on each other, and eventually realizing that the journey itself was more memorable than the destination. JikookVerse family, if there is one thing this entire moment reminds us of, it is that the smallest interactions can sometimes tell the biggest stories. We often focus on major moments, performances, interviews, events, celebrations. But sometimes, the moments that stay in our hearts are much quieter. A glance, a laugh, a question, a bottle of water, a simple "are you okay?" And sometimes that is enough. Jimin and Jungkook did not need to create some enormous moment inside that taxi. They simply existed in the same space. And somehow, that was enough to make the ride memorable. There was comfort in the silence, playfulness in the conversation, and a familiar kind of warmth in the way they checked on each other. And perhaps that is why the story feels so special. Because it does not rely on anything extravagant. It is built entirely from little things. The kind of little things people often overlook. But when you put them together, they create a picture that feels surprisingly complete. Jimin was tired. Jungkook noticed. Jungkook was tired too. Jimin noticed. One suggested food, the other rejected it. Then they switched roles. One remembered an old story. The other remembered it too. The rain started. They watched it together. The destination arrived, and neither seemed completely ready for the ride to end. That is the entire story. And somehow, it feels like much more. Maybe that is the magic of a quiet moment. You do not realize how meaningful it is while it is happening. You only understand it later, when you remember the laughter, when you remember the silence, when you remember the little acts of care, when you remember how comfortable everything seemed. And that is exactly what makes this taxi story so unforgettable. Not the taxi itself, not the destination, not even the conversation. It is the feeling of two people being able to turn an ordinary ride into something worth remembering. JikookVerse family, this is why we love the little moments. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories are not written in huge letters. They are hidden between sentences, between laughs, between glances, between the moments when one person quietly asks another if they are okay. And maybe the most touching part is that neither Jimin nor Jungkook needed to make a big deal out of any of it. They simply continued talking, continued laughing, continued being comfortable. And eventually, the taxi arrived, just like every ride eventually does. But for those few minutes, the outside world seemed to disappear. There was only the sound of the rain, the movement of the city, their conversation, and the feeling that neither of them was in a hurry to break that little bubble. So, JikookVerse family, what do you think made this taxi ride so memorable? Was it the way Jungkook noticed Jimin was tired? Was it Jimin checking on Jungkook in return? Was it their endless conversation about food? Or was it simply the comfortable silence between them? Because sometimes, silence tells us just as much as words. And in this story, the silence was never empty. It was comfortable, familiar, warm, and filled with the kind of ease that makes a simple taxi ride feel like something you want to remember. This is why ordinary moments can become extraordinary memories. You do not always need fireworks. Sometimes you just need rain on a taxi window, two people sitting side by side, a few jokes, a few memories, and someone asking, "Are you okay?" That question can mean so much when it comes from the right person, and Jimin's answer seemed to say it all. He felt better because they had talked. Sometimes that is all we need after a long day. Someone who makes the road feel shorter. Someone who makes silence feel comfortable. Someone who can make you laugh when you are tired. And someone who can turn an ordinary ride home into a memory that stays with you. So, JikookVerse family, that brings us to the end of today's story here on JikookVerse. And if this little taxi ride reminded you of why the smallest Jikook moments can feel so special, then you already know what to do. Stay close to JikookVerse, because sometimes the biggest stories are not the ones that happen under bright lights. Sometimes they happen quietly, somewhere between one destination and the next. And sometimes, all it takes is Jimin, Jungkook, a taxi, a rainy night, and a conversation that neither of them wanted to end. Thank you for staying with me, JikookVerse family. Keep your hearts warm, keep your favorite moments close, and remember that even the simplest journey can become a beautiful memory. This is JikookVerse, and I will see you in the next story.